Titanic, Real Testimonies, Part 2. As we saw in the previous video, the controversial testimony of Alexander Carlisle, the chief engineer of the White Star Line, accused Thomas Andrews of succumbing to company pressures and requesting the removal of 32 lifeboats from the Titanic's original design. Now, we will hear the version of Thomas Andrews, the chief engineer who replaced Alexander Carlisle during the Titanic's construction. But first, welcome to Brugger Films. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our productions. Let's dive in.
My name is Thomas Andrews. In 1908, I was put in charge of the design and supervision of the Grand Olympic-class ships for the White Star Line, which stood out as the largest ships in history at that time. These magnificent vessels, notable for their size and luxury, were improved based on observations I made during the maiden voyage of the Olympic in 1911, ensuring any imperfections were corrected in the Titanic's design. On the Titanic's maiden voyage in 1912, I led the guarantee group, composed of 9 technicians tasked with monitoring the vessel and identifying any issues with its design. After the departure of the chief engineer and architect Alexander Carlisle, I assumed all the final responsibilities for the project. Early in the voyage, as we were leaving the port of Southampton, the moorings of a small ship came loose, and it drifted towards the Titanic's propellers. The tugboats managed to prevent a disaster right at the start of the journey. I found the whole incident very unpleasant. Throughout the trip, I had the habit of walking around the ship with my notebook, looking for any imperfections. I discovered that one of the steam tables in the restaurant kitchen wasn't working properly. The plaster used on the promenade deck was too dark, and some furniture needed to be painted green for aesthetic reasons. Being a perfectionist, I saw the need to reduce the number of screws in the cabins. I also noticed that the reading room for first-class women was underutilized, so I planned to create 2 more passenger cabins in its place. Unfortunately, the Titanic collided with an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912. I was in my cabin when someone knocked on the door, informing me that Captain Edward Smith required my immediate presence on the bridge. The captain told me what had happened, and we quickly went to Deck G to inspect the damage. We immediately found that the water had already completely flooded the mailroom. By then, 5 compartments were flooded, and I soon realized that the Titanic was doomed. We returned to the upper deck, and I tried to avoid panic among the passengers. I made a quick mental calculation and advised the immediate launching of the lifeboats, predicting that the ship would sink completely within about an hour, although it surprisingly took more than 2 hours to sink. Sometimes, I wonder if the outcome would have been different with a frontal impact. Designed with 16 watertight compartments, I believed the ship could stay afloat with 3 or 4 compartments flooded. However, the gash in the hull resulted in 6 compartments being affected, causing the bow to gradually dip. 45 minutes after the collision, more than 13,700 tons of water had flooded the ship, overwhelming the capacity of the ballast and bilge pumps. The angle of the Titanic's tilt quickly changed from 0 to about 4.5 degrees within the first hour after the collision. At one point, the ship stabilized for a while, giving the false impression that it had steadied and could remain afloat until rescue arrived. Around 1:30 a.m., the rate at which the forward section was sinking increased, and the Titanic reached an angle of about 10 degrees. At 2:15 a.m., I went to the deck and saw the panicked crowd. However, there were still women hesitating to board the last lifeboats. I began shouting, "Ladies, you must get in at once. There is no time to lose. You cannot pick and choose your boat. Don't hesitate." Panic engulfed the deck, and I realized that the captain had lost control. The last time I saw him, he was heading towards the cabin at the front of the ship. The noise was deafening, with the funnels venting steam from the boilers. There were still many women and children on the deck, and some lifeboats with only a few people on board. In the midst of the crowd, I saw Stewardess Sloane near one of the boats and asked, "Why are you still here?" She replied that all her friends were staying behind, and it wouldn't feel right to leave them. I quickly responded, "Would it be wrong for you not to go? You must get in now, Sloane." She finally obeyed my plea and got into a lifeboat. In shock, I went to the first-class smoking room and stood in front of the fireplace, looking at the painting, "Approach to the New World," by the artist Norman Wilkinson. and checking the time on the clock above the fireplace. I lost all hope and went down with the Titanic at the age of 39. My body was never found.
Thomas Andrews, according to Alexander Carlisle's allegations, indeed removed more than half of the lifeboats from the Titanic's original design. Captain Edward Smith, honoured even after his death, handed the ship's command to his subordinates Murdoch, 6th Officer James Moody, and helmsman Robert Hitchens, ignoring iceberg warnings. However, as testified by Frederick Fleet, the lookout who spotted the iceberg, 39 seconds was an incredibly short time to avoid the massive ice formation. But what can William McMaster Murdoch, who was on the bridge that fateful night, reveal to us? His words might shed light on the events that led to the Titanic's tragic downfall and clarify the truth about his death.
My name is William McMaster Murdoch, and I served as first officer on the RMS Titanic. Coming from a lineage of sailors, the surname Murdoch carries the significant connotation of man of the sea in my family. I was assigned by Captain Smith to be on duty on the bridge on the fateful night of the accident. Upon receiving the news of the iceberg sighting, I immediately ordered a reversal of the engines and an evasive maneuver to avoid the collision with the massive ice formation. Contrary to the belief that the size of the rudder would compromise the Titanic's agility, tests had shown that the Titanic had remarkable capabilities for evasive maneuvers and quick stops. Yes, the Titanic was very agile for a ship of that size. We had only 39 seconds between the sighting of the iceberg and the moment of collision. We took every possible measure with utmost agility, communicating to the engine room to reverse the propellers and turning the helm to starboard, aiming to safely avoid the iceberg. Although the Titanic did not collide head-on with the iceberg, we suffered a lateral gash in the hull that compromised the ship's integrity. After the evacuation decision, I was in charge of launching the lifeboats on the starboard side of the ship. I believe I saw Bruce Ismay board one of the lifeboats. Unfortunately, at 39 years old, I did not survive the sinking. I express my gratitude to my fellow officers who took the care to write to my wife Ada, sharing the heroic details of my actions that night. However, the first news of the sinking reached Ada through the newspapers, some of which, like the New York World, erroneously suggested that I had committed suicide aboard the Titanic. Fortunately, on April 24th, Ada received a letter written by Lightoller and co-signed by Pittman, Boxhall, and Lowe, the 4 surviving officers who were with me on the deck that fateful night. In the letter, they regretted not writing sooner to refute the false reports about my death and reaffirmed my actions during the entire evacuation of the ship. Lightoller, the last person to see me alive, clarified that he saw me being swept away by a wave on the boat deck. The letter urged Ada to ignore the false news circulating in the papers. At the end of her life, my wife Ada stated that her only regret was that we never had a child.
James Cameron's iconic 1997 film Titanic may not have properly honoured the character of Murdoch, and the director himself has admitted to misrepresenting this character in the movie. Evidence suggests that Murdoch did not commit suicide, as reported in the newspapers and depicted in the film. An interesting question is what Thomas Andrews said. Could the ship have survived if the collision with the iceberg had occurred head-on, without attempting to swerve away from the massive ice rock? Comment below with your thoughts. In the next video, we will hear from Bruce Ismay, the director of the White Star Line. A controversial figure hated by many, he will emerge with a narrative full of secrets, casting a shadow over the tragic events that unfolded on the RMS Titanic that fateful night. So, don't miss our next production. Once again, thank you for watching another Brugger Films production. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our videos. Follow us on social media as well. A big thank you, and see you in the next film.